Yo, what's cracking, folks? Welcome to episode number 27 of the Painter and the Pixie. I am your host, Jeremy Vassar, and as always, we have your other lovely host, Serina Vassar.
Hi, everybody.
And this is, in this episode of the podcast, we're doing, part two of our brain state
series.
Series here, which the first episode we did was just about brain states and
What are they,
and kind of defining terms and things of that nature. And in this episode, we're talking about how to
successfully move through brain states to reach the right brain state for the right context.
Yes. So, and the phrase for that is brain state regulation, and we want very healthy brain state regulation, much like you want good blood sugar regulation.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
that's great.
That's kind of, we get into a lot of nitty gritty stuff, a little bit longer episode, but it was...
Yeah, we give a lot of examples. Since, you know, there's a lot of people listening, so it was a really fun episode. I think we did a good job of kind of breaking things down for people. We got some top-down views, some bottom-up views, some things to help you regulate in virtually any context.
Yes, so I really think you guys will enjoy this one, and without further ado, please enjoy episode number 27, Brain State Regulation.
This is only the beginning.
All right, ready?
Ready?
What you're going to hear about today is nothing short of a miracle.
Well, I don't believe it.
Let's find out. Ready, set, go.
Well, hello, little lady.
Hello, Jeremy. Not little lady.
Yeah, that's not how I'm usually described.
Yeah, not usually, or ever.
Yeah, or ever. Doing good.
Nice.
Having a good time.
Yeah, welcome to episode 2.
Yeah, numero dos of brain state stuff. Now we're going to be talking about the... this is stuff Serina and I really geek out on.
Yeah,
so
much fun. I think you're going to like it.
It's going to get nerdy, but we'll do our best to bring it back to a palatable form of reality.
We're good at that.
Yeah,
it's
we're
okay.
good. We're good. So I know we were just talking about, we should probably do a little bit of a recap.
Yeah, let's do that.
Of the brain states and what we're going to then be kind of getting into this week.
Yep. So this is episode 2, two-parter of our brain state and brain state regulation series.
Yeah.
And there's only 2 parts, so it's a short series, but
that we know of right now.
That we know of right now in this particular recording setting. So last episode, if you didn't catch that, go back and listen to episode 26 of our show.
Yep.
We talked about what are brain states, and we introduced the concept of brain states that was kind of developed by Dr. Bruce Perry, who is a well-renowned childhood psychiatrist and super big in the world of trauma and mental health care. And he wrote this great book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. He's got he's got other literature out there, but this is a really great primer if you want an introduction to what this whole process is. I do want to give the disclaimer, which I forgot to give in episode 1, that there's some sensitive material in this book. So go into it being aware that the full title is The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog and Other Stories from a Child Psychiatrist's Notebook. He deals with childhood trauma. So there are some significant cases in this
intense
story.
Intense stuff.
He does fine wrapping it up, but just be aware.
Yeah.
That's what you're getting into.
That's a good move.
Yeah.
Probably should have said that in the last episode, too.
I know, I should have.
That's all right.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Make a note of it.
Yeah.
So he developed this concept of brain states, and he's got a chart here in the back of this book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, on page 249 of the chart of brain states. So you can kind of use that as a refresher. Essentially, we've got 5 brain states. The top of the brain is calm. You move down 1 step, that's alert. You move one step further down, and that is alarm. You move 1 step below that, you've got fear, and the very bottom of the brain is terror.
Yep. And each of those states corresponds with a actual part of the brain that's more active in each one of those states.
Right. So the top of the brain is your prefrontal or neocortex, as he calls it in this book. You move down to alert, the second part, which is your cortex. You move down to alarm, that's your limbic system. That's emotional. You move down again, you're at the fear center, which is the midbrain. And then below that in the terror, you're down in the brain stem. As you're in each brain state, you have a shortened ability to, or maybe you're an altered ability to be able to perceive time. The higher you are in the brain, the more you're able to think creatively, abstractly, imagine into the future. And the lower you go down, the smaller your window of time becomes. So your second brain state, alert, is days or hours. Your next brain state down, alarm, which is limbic, is hours or minutes. The next brain state down, fear, is minutes or seconds. And then the very bottom of the brain, terror. There's no sense of time. In the last episode, Jeremy gave a really great analogy about his car accident that he was in to show how that happens.
Yep.
So I think that's enough of a recap. Most people listening have heard the first episode.
Yeah, and I think that also something we touched on in that first episode as well is that each of these states has a reason for existing.
There's a purpose.
There's a purpose for them. The issue you get into and that people get into all the time is that they're in a brain state that is inappropriate for the context in which they're experiencing life. So, and we talk a little bit about trauma with PTSD. A lot of times that will...
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, that will trigger someone to go into a fear state of either, very fearful or terror in a situation that doesn't merit that response. So in this episode, we're talking about how to get yourself in a more optimal brain state, whatever direction that may be. And Serina is going to talk first about... how to go from more of a fear state, or at least limbic,
a lower part of your brain to a higher part of your brain.
In this context. So we're saying going from less cognitive to more cognitive.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe that. And I like what you said too, and I think that's really good to emphasize, is not any one of these brain states is bad. It's just going to be more or less appropriate for the context that you're in.
Yeah, there's a biological reason for these states to exist in your own brain. These systems are hardwired in. They're particularly the fear centers are the oldest parts of the brain from an evolution.
The reptilian part of the brain.
Yeah, they're some of the oldest kind of systems in the human body, and they're in there because that's what kept us alive for this long.
And they still do.
And they still do. So.
Yeah, if you are new to this, we go into a lot of detail in episode 1 of this, episode number 26, the first part. So go back and listen if you need a refresher on some of those extra details.
Yes, scram.
No, don't scram. Stay with us. Listen, enjoy, learn.
So, you're kicking this one off, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we talk about brain state regulation, like this whole episode is about here, we're talking about how do you move from one brain state to the next. Being low in the brain is typically less optimal when you're dealing with a general life situation. Most of the time we want to be in that prefrontal cortex, the top of our brain, the creative, abstract thinking part of our brain. That's where we can solve problems and come up with solutions to difficult things. If you're, in a work scenario and you've got a deadline, you need to be in that cognitive part of your brain to figure out what steps do I need to take before you kind of hammer down and get the job done.
Yeah, and it's the calmest of the states.
It's the calmest of the states. Yeah. Calm, cool, collected.
Yep.
Right there. So what happens though in life, as Jeremy kind of illustrated, was we drop down low in the brain. We have something that dysregulates us and puts us down into a limbic state, or black and white. That's that concrete state. The goal is to help regulate to the appropriate level of stimulation, the appropriate brain state for the activity or moment that you're engaging with.
Right.
So a lot of the context I use this within is with my clients, right? I mean, personally, we all need to regulate our own brains, day-to-day life things, but I work with a lot of people who have a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of emotional eating. We talked about that, touched on that in the first episode, that people tend to say, oh, I'm an emotional eater, or I feel hangry. Right?
Yep.
And they get dysregulated. When you're hangry, that's a combination of the word hungry and angry. So between meals, you might get shaky, you might feel dizzy, you might feel like I'm foggy, I can't think clearly. And what has happened there is your blood sugar has dipped. So this is kind of a combination of nutrition related to brain state regulation. Your blood sugar has dipped and your body says, oh no, what are we going to do? And it sends out a whole bunch of stress hormones like cortisol and epinephrine is the same thing as adrenaline, to bring your blood sugar back up. Well, the problem is your brain still has to respond to those stress hormones. And you go, oh my gosh, whoosh, drop right down into a limbic state, very much emotional.
Yep.
So how do you regulate yourself out of that? Well, there's a bunch of things you can do, and I might actually start this from a little bit lower in the brain and kind of work my way up. I think I'll start from the bottom and work my way up.
Sure.
So if you get to a point where you're stressed, you're triggered down, you drop down to a low part of your brain, maybe terror, maybe fear, how do I say this? The terror part of the brain is not very frequently activated for most people. That moment where it's like the moment stretches on forever. Like you illustrated in your car, you turn the wheel and it did not move. Car stayed going straight.
Yeah, and we're not talking about a flow state.
No.
Flow state is also when time stands still and you kind of slow down time, which is optimal in like athletics and certain things. This is not that. This
is life or death.
Like full blast terror. Yeah, I'm gonna die. Like I'm actively getting mauled by said predator. So.
Or you turn the wheel and if the car did not respond, which means I probably will smash into this tree and die.
Yep.
Thankfully, you smashed into the tree and didn't die, rolled the car and all so forth. But you're here to tell the story. When you're way, way, way low in the brain, the only way you can really move back up is a different type of somatic stimulation. Now, somatic is a physical stimulation, right? So these fidget spinners are really popular nowadays, where people twirl them and it spins. And I'm sure if anybody's listening, I'm sure they know what a fidget spinner is. If not, Google it. But these things are designed, or koosh balls or slinkies, you play with them, or even clicking a pen. I used to click pens a whole bunch back in the day. That's a sound stimulation, the click. Tactile stimulation with your hands. It's a physical stimulation. I guess it's the same as tactile stimulation. It's an experiential thing. You have to press and depress and click on that button of the pen. And what that does is it literally will help to regulate your brain. Helps your brain to feel more calm. A perfect example that I love to give about regulating from a really low part of the brain is having a baby who's crying.
Okay.
You have a little baby. The baby is way down low in the brain. It does not understand the context. Something's scary, something's uncomfortable. It just does not like where it is. What do? You rock the baby. You coo at the baby. Oh, shh. You make sounds. You stimulate tactilely, right? Rocking is a really soothing thing for the brain. It helps you to feel more calm. Babies are no different than adults. Adults can find that soothing brain regulation process from rocking. Rocking chairs are great for that.
Well, babies are quite a bit different.
Well, they are.
Because their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed and all that. But
that's true.
But we all have the same systems that a baby has. So the same things that work for a baby will work for us, which is what you were trying to say. I was just being a dick.
Yeah. I was trying to say is that those parts of the brain that existed as a baby still exist as an adult.
Absolutely.
What happens as an adult is we grow, and what you said, our prefrontal cortex develops so that we have the cognitive capacity to say, I'm going to regulate intentionally.
Right.
Babies don't have that yet.
Yes, they just cry and...
Yeah, and then you have to help them do that regulation.
Someone help me fix this.
Yeah. You have to be their prefrontal cortex for them.
It's literally what you are as a parent.
Literally, yep.
That's literally what you are.
Yep, helping to make good choices and feel better when they don't feel good.
The regulator.
Yeah. And a lot of times when we don't feel good, maybe we can't put a name on it, we don't know what this is because we've dropped low in the brain.
Yeah.
And the lower you get, the less of an ability you have to describe what you're feeling to begin with. Right? So that's why the tactile stimulation really works well. Playing with fidget spinners, rubbing your hands together, touching your face, touching your arms like you did after you rolled your car. You touched your arms, you touched your legs. That's all physical stimulation to help regulate your brain.
Well, that was a systems check to make sure everything was still there and working.
Yeah.
So, and along the line with fidget spinners, I'm a big fan of pin spinning. And like doing things that are skills. Because they get a little more ingrained because there's a little bit more going on. So I like doing.
And you're more focused.
It gets you out, at least for me, it gets me out of those lower spaces quicker because I can go into sequences that I've drilled into my hands like thousands and thousands of times. So big fan of that.
Yeah, the lower you are in your brain, the more simple something has to be to help you regulate because you can't focus on something more complex. So maybe a fidget spinner is great, but then once you're more regulated, you can do a pen trick. You have the capacity to access that part of your brain.
It also depends on how many reps of that you have.
Oh, that's true too.
Because it's like the more you do it, my hand can do it on its own. It's not even, I don't like consciously think about it.
Right, because you've developed that muscle memory for that particular skill.
Yeah.
So those are really helpful things. Sometimes you need to bring yourself back to reality. If you're really, really stressed, panicking, smelling a really strong smell is a great way to help bring yourself back to a more cognitive, or I should say less dysregulated space. So strong coffee, peppermint, what is that one? Tea tree oil has a really strong scent. So some of those things can really help to ground you.
Yeah, like strong tea.
Yeah. Coffee's a good one. A lot of people have coffee in their world. So smelling coffee grounds or fresh coffee or something like that can be a good jolt back to out of the terror back into at least fear, if not up to limbic.
And to touch on something real quick, that other I think so far we've been talking a lot about how to regulate yourself, which I think is also really important. But also, if you and I are married, so we're around each other a lot, there are things you can do in your relationships to help your friends and family regulate as well, like or strangers for that matter. I mean, I'd be careful with that, but if you have someone who's panicking or in that kind of a situation, maybe they're getting dissociative, it's those strong, like brewing coffee, a strong tea, something warm they can hold, like those
Drinking
types,
something cold,
like a heavy blanket. Those kinds of things can be a somatic stimulation, a rocking sensation, any of those kinds of like rocking chairs and hammocks and things like that are, you can bring someone out of a lower state by, so just giving another context for
that's
why,
really great.
Why these are, and
helpful.
I know you're going to get into some things about like naming things, but you can also like ask people like, what do you see right now? What do you like? So I don't want to jump ahead real quick, but like, just to give, because sometimes it's hard to be like, what can I do for myself in this situation?
It's very hard in that moment.
Very
it's
hard.
Great to have help. What you said, have a companion, a family member, a friend who can help you to regulate. When you get really low in the brain like that, what exactly you said is exactly correct. It's extraordinarily hard, virtually impossible to do it for yourself.
Yeah.
It's great to have someone who can help you regulate.
Yeah, and it's we're going to get to this too, but I like to think of it as when you're in your best cognitive space, you can plan for the times when you're not in your most cognitive space, and you have to, this is going to sound a little harsh, but you have to I treat myself when I drop into those things as like a dumb, panicky version of me. So it's like, I got to make things super simple and like break it down almost like you would, honestly, like a small kid who's freaking out. You got to like, I kind of like do self-talk to myself like that. Like anyway, I'm jumping around too much. It's
okay.
Yeah, so thinking about like that, I just want to put it out there that the things that Serina's talking about right now, you can also help
other people to do as well.
And I think the word that I would use to describe some of the things is grounding. You're trying to...
that's a good word to use for this
because
context.
What we're talking about is when you have this terror response in a context that does not warrant a terror response. So when you say grounding, what that means is bringing yourself back to the reality of the situation that is not a lion jumping out of the woods and trying to maul you.
Yeah.
So that's what grounding is. It is taking yourself and putting yourself in the more accurate present moment of reality that does not warrant this crazy kind of, I don't want to say crazy, but an inappropriate biological response.
A more extreme response than maybe strictly necessary.
And that is undesirable, we'll say, in that context. So grounding's a good word that I like.
Yeah, grounding's a really good word. I think that's helpful. I usually think about that in the next step here that we'll talk about. So when you come from terror to fear, when you're in the terror part of your brain, there's no sense of time. You cannot think about anything other than that exact moment, right? Or very close to that exact moment. Then you move up slightly in the brain and you're in fear. And in fear, you have at least seconds that you can imagine through, you can think about. So you kind of really have to be at least in that fear spot to do cognitive or to be able to do any kind of regulation yourself. But exactly what you said is correct. You might have to help someone who's way far gone, way far down, help them to come back up a little bit before they can sort of take over from there.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be like somebody in a full blast panic attack.
Full blast panic attack.
They're not like thinking of things.
They can't.
They can't. You literally can't.
Yeah, so. Physically, we didn't mention this last episode. Mention it here. Physiologically in the body, what happens when you drop really low in the brain like that is you have this big dump of stress hormones and enzymes and neurotransmitters and chemicals in the brain that take a minimum of 22 minutes to clear out of your system. So when you drop way low like that, you can't expect to pop right out of it instantly in some circumstances because you've still got these things coursing through your veins. It takes time to let them dissipate and move through.
Yeah.
So I like that example with panic attacks. Some people, you have panic attacks and you physically, physiologically cannot think through that clearly until you've had a little bit of space.
Right. And I would say there in that, just we'll sit here for a second.
Sure.
When we have that panic response, when you get into terror, a lot of times your brain can go one of two ways. And I just want to briefly touch on a dissociative response and why that exists. Because a lot of people are, I would assume, who haven't dealt with this material before, like, why does that even exist? And the research that I've done and seen and moved through, so you've got a dissociative response where your brain, it's almost an out-of-body experience where you're disconnected. You're disconnected. I call it clipping out. It's just when it's like, hello, like no one there.
Well, what happens is you've removed yourself from the situation from a cognitive perspective. It's like what you said, an out-of-body experience. It's almost like you're watching the situation happen, or you just don't feel anything.
Right.
You zone out completely.
There's a disconnect from mind-body. Yes. There's a numbing of the nerves. The blood pools in your organs.
Pulls toward the center.
And generally, like, you've got a severe drop in blood pressure and heart rate. And what that is, again, this is just the research I've done, so I'm not saying I'm an expert on any of this.
No, but you're right so
far. Again, I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not licensed in any way. I just know about some of the stuff. But the reason is, if you got mauled by a lion, they generally will go for like limbs. A lot of times they hit a limb first.
Yeah.
So what it's doing, your body is literally trying to, mitigate the amount of pain you're going to experience.
Yep.
And then it's trying to give you the best chance of survival, which if it cuts the blood flow to the arms and the legs where you're likely to experience an attack, because when you're defending yourself, that's what you'd be using, and preserving your internal organs, your vital organs, that is going to give you the best chance to survive until someone's going to come and help you, or you can
get away
or whatever. So that is the biological reason that exists. Now the dissociative response can happen, like we said, out of context for a variety of reasons, whether it's, from like a war experience or early childhood trauma or PTSD.
That's what happens. You mentioned you have two sides of that coin. You have a dissociative response or a panic response.
Well, and it's, do you think that as you panic, you can then panic yourself into a dissociative state?
Correct.
That's kind of what I was...
That's what happens there. But technically speaking, you've got two sides of that coin. We've all heard fight or flight.
Yeah.
That's the panic response. But then there's, some people may not have heard this, fight, flight, or freeze.
Yep.
Freeze is the dissociative response to that. The fight or flight is where you're in panic mode, you're go, run away from the lion, as opposed to like a possum play dead.
Yeah.
That's almost what your body does. It helps you to play dead, quote unquote, so that you can preserve yourself in the midst of that attack. Exactly. Yeah. You described that nicely.
And you can have also there's also dissociative responses that are extremely aggressive, that are like almost a disconnect as well, when it's like just full blast rage. That would be another way to solve that problem, is attack the crap out of whatever was coming at you. So different people kind of lean towards different things.
Yep.
But that's also a form of dissociative response, which is like the super, super extreme end of things. Yeah. It's a state that not many of us would want to engage with on a regular basis.
Yeah, but I will say that to qualify that just a bit, is that a lot of us do experience mild dissociative responses on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Whereas, like you gave this example once before, you're driving home, you leave work, you drive home, next thing you know, you're in your driveway. You zoned out, right? You didn't really pay attention to your drive home. It was so automatic. That's technically a dissociative response, a very mild dissociative response.
Right.
So if you ever hear zoning out, that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
Exactly the same things, just to a further extreme where your body thinks you're dying or wants to prevent you from dying.
Yeah, I think that's the general flavor, but I don't think your heart rate would drop in that sense. I think that's kind of more in the flow state line of things when you say.
It's possible, but I think a lot of times zoning out, it's still a mild dissociative response.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So when you're really low in the brain, like you said, when you're maybe even towards that dissociative side or in the midst of a panic attack, it's really helpful to have someone who can kind of guide you through and give you some support, make you smell some coffee or whatever. Drinking cold water is a great way to help someone calm down. If you know that they're having a big stress response, they're low in the brain, giving them an ice cold glass of water is a great way to stimulate a lot of physical receptors. And you drink it, you feel the ice water go all the way down, hit your stomach. It's a really good way to help bring more calm, to bring you a little bit higher in the brain. So this part is the most applicable, I think, for a lot of people that I work with in daily life and these things, is when you're in that limbic sort of center where you're very emotional, angry, sad, happy. Well, happy, I guess, is usually okay, but that's an emotion, so that's why I said it.
Yeah.
When you're on sort of like that emotional roller coaster, several things you can do to help yourself. One, Make sure your blood sugar is nice and stable. That's what I work on with all of my clients. We work towards stable blood sugar because that's a really easy, simple layer you can just fix. You don't have to do much work to balance your blood sugar in the long run. But then some of my favorite activities is to name things that you see. This is another grounding. This is where grounding comes in super strong, full force. You have a little bit more control of your faculties when you're there. You have minutes and hours, I think, right? Minutes and hours for the limbic?
Yeah, you're definitely further along than...
minutes and hours, yeah.
Minutes and hours, yeah.
You have the ability then to kind of rationalize with yourself in a small degree. So you can recognize when you're there, wow, I'm limbic right now. I'm in the limbic part of my brain. You know, you're having an argument with someone or what have you. Okay, I think I'm limbic. I need to take a minute and do some regulation. I see the black desk in front of me, the dog crate below that. There's a toy hedgehog that Gus shoots the nose off of in the crate. You start naming the things that you see and describing it. Jeremy, blue jeans, red t-shirt, sitting in the blue bucket chair. He looks like he's almost too big to fit in the chair. Reference headphones on, microphone in front of his face, black. There's some silver on it. You start really, really engaging with what you see.
Yeah.
And now you are one step above. You're in concrete.
Yep. Okay.
Right? You're higher in the brain.
Because you're saying basically black and white statements.
Black and white statements.
Yeah, okay.
What do I see?
Okay.
There is a definitive answer. Right?
Right.
I see this. You can also say and describe what you feel. I feel myself sitting in this blue chair. My left leg is crossed in front of my right leg. I feel my toes of my left foot touching, but my big toe is free. You can start describing what you feel. I feel my sweater on my shoulders. I feel my wedding ring on my left ring finger. Ring finger. I feel my watch on my wrist. And what that does is engages yourself somatically and concretely. I feel this. Right? So that's a great way to begin regulation. You can count. One of my favorites is counting ceiling tiles. I tell my clients that all the time.
Okay.
What are those banister poles called?
Spindles.
Spindles. Thank you. Contracting husband.
Mm-hmm.
The spindles, start counting those things because boom, you're concrete. You're right there in concrete. It's great.
It's like I Spy with my little eye, but with yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't have to say it out loud. You don't want to feel like you're crazy. Do it in your head, because if you're sitting in your office and you start saying, I feel my butt in the chair, someone's going to be like, what is wrong with this person?
Just pointing at things and naming them.
Yeah.
Blue cup.
Yeah. Oh, and that's a good one too. Picking a color and naming as many things you can see that are that color.
I like that one. Yeah.
So what can you see in this room that's blue? And you can coach someone through it. So if Jeremy, if we're freaking out, I'll say, do you see anything blue?
Right.
Do you see anything blue?
Oh, yeah. The chairs, your mug over there, towels inside that closet over there. Like
yeah.
Stuff.
And now you're black and white. You're concrete.
Yeah.
You're at least, you're moving in the right direction. Now you're a little bit more stable, right? Sometimes that's hard to do. Sometimes that's a little bit too advanced. So there's another technique. Well, actually, before I get there, let's talk about this first. The ideal for me to get yourself regulated quickly is to ask yourself questions and answer them.
Okay.
It sounds simple, but it's extremely hard in the moment. Unless you practice. The beautiful thing about all this stuff that we're talking about today is that they are skills you can develop.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if we emphasized that in the early part of this episode the way we did in the last one.
Yeah, you're right.
But just a little caveat here. All the things that Serina's talking about are not... few people learn healthy ways to regulate.
Yeah.
From day one.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, what your family's exposed to, how they regulate, how, you can get, there are a lot more, I would say, unhealthy ways or less optimal ways to regulate than healthy ones that people really know about. So, and all of these things are skills.
You can develop them. Practice.
And the better you are at regulating your brain, the easier time you're going to have navigating through this crazy world of ours. Like it's going to make you a more healthy person to have relationships with. It's just like, that's why Serina and I are starting with this, because it's one of the underpinnings of the framework, at least that I believe really helps people move through the world in a healthy way.
Yep, I totally believe that. So
it's kind of like, you're learning how to drive your car. You got to learn when to speed up and when to slow down and how to turn and it's like kind of learning that, to use a kind of a crude metaphor.
Well, and along those lines, it's more than learning how to drive the car. It's making sure you're in the driver's seat of the car.
Right.
Because a lot of times when we feel dysregulated, when we drop low in the brain, we don't feel like we have any control over ourselves or our situation. I mean, that's what happens when you drop down into the fear center of the brain, fear and terror. You feel like you've lost control. I don't know what's going to happen. The lion might eat me.
Yeah, you're just riding out the waves of your
You're no longer in the driver's seat. So the whole purpose of practicing regulation, which I think sometimes people call coping skills, I think we can use those interchangeably.
Okay, yeah.
Just thought about that right now, is to make sure you feel like you're in the driver's seat, to give you back the power so that you can be in the driver's seat. And then you have the nuances of pressing the gas and the brake and appropriate turn signals and these things, right? You learn those nuances as you already are back in the driver's seat.
Yeah, and like what you said before too, is that as you, like something as simple as asking yourself questions, something insanely easy to do when you're in your prefrontal cortex thinking abstractly. It is really hard when you are freaking out for like, I think for whatever reason, it's really difficult. And then, as you said, the more you do it, it's like the more you develop these skills, the more lifelines you're throwing down to yourself when you're in a freak out moment. And that's really what we're talking about here. We want to give people as many lifelines, as many paths out of those lower parts of the brain as possible, because that's really, we're going to talk about some other ways to regulate from the other end of things. But for most people, this is what's the most helpful, is getting you in a more cognitive space, in a calmer space,
putting yourself back in the driver's seat,
a more rational space. And like you said, giving them control, empowering them to have the skills and the abilities to get out. I mean, that's what like martial arts are. That's what jiu-jitsu is. It's giving people, I mean, the reason I drill so much and do all the stuff that I do is that if I ever do get in, a life and death situation, or a situation where I have to defend myself, I've drilled skills that I know for a fact, even I've been completely in terror a couple times in training, and I still went after, they were my older skills. You kind of go back to your,
what is more reflexive.
It's very reflexive, but you want to train those reflexes to be optimal in that situation. So, and you drill and drill and drill and drill, so that when you're in a lower brain state, you have access to these skills that are appropriate for the level of threat you're experiencing. And when someone is trying to choke you unconscious, that's the time to, like, you're going to activate those skills. So, and then in a street scenario, it's completely, you're going to have more of the fear, more of the, so you want to be even more
regulated,
trained and able to regulate yourself and stay as calm as possible in those scenarios.
And access the skills that you need, because I think that's a really good point. When you are lower in the brain, you have a lessened capacity to access other memories, what you said. We talked about this more in the first episode, but you have lesser ability to rationalize, for sure. So the more you drill these skills outside of a massively stressful situation, the easier it is to access those skills when you're inside of a stressful situation.
Yeah, and you see this all the time in competition and in, just to bring it to an athletic perspective, there's a phrase, even a common, I guess it's a phrase that people say in jiu-jitsu, is whenever you have like grapplers, that are just grapplers, come into like an MMA scenario where there's strikes, you can actually punch people. They say, like, you punch a black belt in the face, he's now a brown belt. You punch a brown belt in the face, he's now a purple belt. And those are descending. So basically, when people get rattled, they have less access to their top flight skills. So they become less.
Great analogy.
That's exactly what you're talking about. It's you're lower down the chain. If you freak someone out, they're less skilled in whatever they're skilled in. So that's kind of what we're talking about.
Exactly. You cannot develop new skills when you're low in the brain. You only have access to what you've already experienced and learned and done in the past, especially if it's something that has been either rooted really, really strong from a traumatic memory, or something that you've drilled a million times. Now, one of the cool things is, as you practice this regulation, you might have PTSD. You might have post-traumatic stress as a result of a traumatic event. And no matter what happens, when somebody drops something, you hear a loud noise, you drop down into the bottom of your brain. The cool thing is, over time, as you practice this regulation, you can rewire your brain so that that's no longer automatic. It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, because as we spoke of in the first episode, when you have a traumatic event happen, or something incredibly stressful, startling, which encodes as a traumatic event, it gets stored in your amygdala, which is the stress remembering spot of your brain, to keep you safe. So if you touch a hot iron, you know I'm not going to touch that again because that was hot, that was stored in your amygdala. As you continue practicing regulating and moving from a lower context to a higher context more easily, you can start kind of developing a pathway around that amygdala back to the hippocampus, which is your long-term library storage system that's like totally chill.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very cool. So asking yourself questions. Let's go back to that again real quick. When you ask yourself a question, first of all, you have to be relatively concrete to develop a question, right? To say, where am I in the brain? That's a black and white question. There is an answer to that question. You can say, I'm limbic. Okay, great. The goal eventually is to get to the point where you can say, what am I feeling right now? And name a very specific feeling, a very specific response that you've had to a stimuli. Why am I feeling this feeling? Describe how you got there without being re-triggered. And then what can I do about this in the future? It feels uncomfortable, it feels whatever, and or kind of dispel a belief. So let's give an example here. I'm feeling stressed. I'm making this up, folks, just so you know. This is not a real example, but I'm going to use me and Jeremy in it fictitiously.
Gotcha.
So,
not inspired by true events.
Not inspired by true events. But so let's say that you and I have gotten into some kind of argument with each other.
Ooh, all right.
Oh my gosh, I know. So we've gotten into an argument, or not even an argument. Let's take a step easier than that so it's less stressful for people listening. You slept poorly. I had a headache. I have a migraine going on, right? Or my tooth, like this tooth problem I've been having. And okay. I'm a little bit less aware of how my actions are impacting other people. And I might be a little bit more snappy, might be a little bit more like short with you because my head hurts, right? I'm lower in the brain. I don't have access. I'm in pain, and pain puts you lower in the brain. Right? So you might go off, oh, what's wrong with Serina? She's just being so mean today. Like she's just like snapping at every little thing. I mean, I know I left the cup on the counter. I didn't put it in the dishwasher, but geez, she didn't have to put it in the dishwasher for me, you know? So, but what happens there is I'm dysregulated. You're becoming dysregulated. You're becoming like, oh my gosh, what's going on with Serina? You're spiraling downward. You're becoming more emotional. You're becoming hurt, right? I don't understand why Serina is being so mean to me. But right there you can say, oh, where am I in the brain? Where am I in the brain? I'm emotional. I feel hurt. Well, when I feel hurt, what's behind that? Well, I feel like unloved. I feel like she's not loving me well because I'm hurt by her response. You ask yourself questions. You're now black and white, and you can rationalize. Now you're in creative abstract. Oh, but I recognize she's in pain. She's not feeling well. She's not intentionally trying to hurt me. I'm fine. It was not on purpose. She wasn't trying to hurt me on purpose. Now you're right back in the abstract, creative part of your brain. Understand you've taken that negative emotion that might be traveling on down to your amygdala, and you've put that right back in your hippocampus. Context, understanding, you move through it.
Yep.
Right? That's really beautiful regulation.
Yeah.
It's hard to do in the moment.
Very hard to do. But the more you do it, the easier it is.
But the more you do it, the easier it is. And I think that's a really good analogy to be able to get to remove yourself. We talked about before being in the observer role, where you want to look at it from a different context. What's happening here? You almost want to remove yourself from the situation. It's almost a positive form of dissociation, where you can say, what do I see? What do I experience? What's happening?
Right.
Now that's hard to do. So ask yourself questions. What am I feeling? I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling slighted. Well, but what's underneath of that? I feel like I'm unloved.
Yeah.
Right? It's usually unloved, or I am unworthy, or I am
not measuring up,
not good enough.
Not good at
That's a really big factor for people. But when you can sort of put that into a healthy context and recognize, no, I am good enough. I am lovable. Just because I put the cup on the counter and at that moment it annoyed Serina does not make me less valuable as a human being.
Yeah.
Right? It helps you to understand and regulate and rewire your brain better.
Right.
Now, I'm going to digress for a moment, and then we can come back around for you. Thanks for indulging. One of the best things that I know to do is, let me rephrase, when you're low, you're limbic, it's really hard to ask those questions and answer them efficiently like I just did.
Yeah.
Super, super hard to do. So you can start with a less scary version of that, and you just ask yourself, what physical sensations am I feeling?
Okay.
Right? Because most of the time, most people, if you're experiencing anger, frustration, fear, anxiety, depression, even, you feel these emotions in your body somewhere. So for example, if you're angry, you might feel your stomach clenching. You might feel your throat getting tighter. If you feel embarrassed, you might feel your face flush, right? Those are all physical sensations of an emotion. So if you can at least start describing of the physical sensation that you're feeling, that's a huge step in the right direction, because you have to be a little bit creative to come up with those sensations, right? So for me, if I start feeling anxious, I feel that in my stomach. Like you might feel like butterflies in my stomach or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's a great start. What sensation am I feeling? Where is it in my body? Gus does not care. He has no worries about regulation. Pet me.
Yeah.
So naming the sensation, naming where it is in the body. And if you're really, really heightened, if you're in the limbic state and you're moving downward to like fear, that's when you're more towards panic or anger or like lashing out or throwing a water bottle at somebody. You know, you need to start releasing some of the stress of that emotion. So you start feeling that sensation, you give yourself a context. So from 0 to 10, how strong is the sensation that I'm feeling?
Yeah.
Then you start visualizing. These visualization techniques are phenomenally helpful for people who are really low and trying to get higher in the brain. Visualize how big the sensation is, what color the sensation is, if it has a shape to it, what's the shape of it, what's the intensity on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10. Do some regulation grounding. Deep breaths. That's really helpful. Mm-hmm. Counting your breath, doing square breathing, right? You breathe in for 4 counts, you hold your breath for 4 counts, you breathe out for 4 counts. Then revisualize your sensation. Is it the same size? Is it the same color? Is it the same intensity? Very likely it's reduced.
What's the tenderness rating?
Yeah, what's the tenderness rating of this scale? Yes, that's a good one. And then you visualize that sensation, those sensations leaving your body. Do they float away out of your chest and wrap themselves up in a little ball and toss away in your wastebasket? Do they just, disappear and turn into vapor and blow out the window? Imagine those sensations leaving your body. And you know what? At the end of that visualization, you're going to feel better.
Right. Yeah.
The stress of that is going to come down. Part of that is you've given your body time, that 22-minute window, to release some of those stress hormones. The other part of that is you've become extraordinarily creative to decipher what you're feeling, right? At least concrete, at least black and white. I feel good. I don't feel good. So those are some really simple ways that I like to help people use those contexts. I have some papers here I was going to touch on. I missed most of that, but I'll come back to a little bit of it. There are some rational versus irrational thoughts. Irrational would be more of that the creative part of your brain, at least concrete.
Okay.
When you're irrational, you're limbic or lower, you might say, I feel awful. I'm stupid. This stinks. This is not right. That's irrational. That's very emotional language. How can you clarify those terms to become rational?
Because they're very broad and non-specific.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. So instead of how awful, say, this is disappointing. I feel disappointed.
Yeah.
Now you're boom, black and white. What happened that made me feel disappointed? Well, I thought Jeremy was going to put the cup in the dishwasher because he knows that that's important to me, and he didn't. I'm disappointed that he didn't do that, So, and then you can say, well, maybe he's having some stress going on too because I've been really crabby with this tooth pain, right? So you can bring yourself back into a cognitive state.
Yeah. And again, like as a partner in a relationship, you can also help each other to regulate and be like, hey, who's the best regulated of us right now? That's the one that should perhaps be calling the shots. And you can also, if you have someone that is having a bad time and freaking out, the calmer you stay, the easier it's going to be them, because we ape each other's behavior.
Reflect it.
Which, and that's not a derogatory term. That's like a term from science. Aping is just mimicking someone else's behavior that you see. And so the calmer you stay, that will actually help them chill out. So
right. And so you have to be well regulated yourself.
Yep.
I love this. I work with a lot of people and like couples or families. And I think it's really nice because you can kind of very gently help someone. If you see that they're totally if you see that I'm totally dysregulated and behaving ridiculously, you can say, oh, Serina, what do you think part of the brain you might be in right now? Asking generally, gently, Do you think you might, not even specific, don't say, do you think you might be limbic? Because someone who's limbic could be like, that's mean.
Yeah.
You're picking on me. But if you just say, you know, I think that there's some stress happening here. What part of the brain might you be in right at this moment? That's a very gentle way of helping someone to start saying, whoa, I think I might be dysregulated. Oh, I'm definitely limbic right now.
And there's a broad application to everything we're talking about here. We did an episode a little bit ago on client interaction. And if you know this game that's going on where people are dysregulated and they're trying to regulate, so I'll give you a very pedestrian example that happens all the time with my clients. For those who don't know, I'm the painter in this duo. So I have a contracting business with my brother, and we do a lot of interior painting. That's our main jam. So one of the issues that we run into is clients will freak out about picking colors.
Oh, yeah.
And picking colors I think it's because there's so many choices. It got rated as one of the most stressful retail experiences.
Highest number of cardiac events in the paint aisle of Home Depot.
Yeah, paint aisle of Home Depot and Lowe's. People are legitimately having heart attacks
over paint colors,
over the paint swatches. So
they're becoming limbic.
Yeah. Well, they're dropping in there. So I know a lot of times when I'm coming into, I meet a new client, and particularly if they're already having construction done, because that's a very displacing thing to happen.
Unsettling. It's
unsettling. You have contractors in your home, you know, particularly kitchen renovations or master bathroom renovations are the most unsettling to people because it messes their whole flow up. And so I know they're going to be somewhat dysregulated sometimes, not all the time, but this happens a lot where I can see them get, like, they start getting flustered and they have to make more decisions, and they get decision fatigue from picking out tile and like all these things. So when I come in, I know this already. I've walked a bunch of people through. So you can name things for them and be like, hey, look, I know this is like picking colors is a pain in the ass. I'm like, we do this all the time. I'm like, color is the easiest thing to change. Like here, and I start like just very calmly explaining the process, be like, this is the product that we use. Like I've done, and like I'll crack jokes. I use a lot of humor to kind of break things up and just calm them down. And then by the end, I've got them laughing and we're talking about colors. And I'm like, look, these are my top 5 beiges, my top 5 grays. Like you kind of look for this kind of looks good here. And once I say like, this is the process we're going through, I know it's completely unsettling. You kind of commiserate a little bit with them, be like, oh, this sucks. I know. I wish there was only 2 paint colors. And just knowing that they're coming from a stressed space, but I want to help them to regulate so that they do make the best decision. But that's like a way that's great. That game's going on.
And you know that,
and I know that going into it. And so just I don't come in all pissed off and like, like I'm chill. Even if I'm having a bad day, I put myself in that mode of like, all right, this is what we're doing. And
you regulate yourself.
Yeah,
you put yourself into that context. I think that's great. And you said this just now, and I want to touch on this. Humor is one of the very best ways to regulate your brain. Laughing. Yeah. If you can get to a point where you're laughing, you've been dysregulated and you're laughing, comedy is a great way to do that. Keeping yourself up in that joyful sort of space, not joyful, but like humorous. That's a great way to regulate your brain. When you can do that, if you've just been like almost having a panic attack to regulating, getting up, someone cracks a joke and you start laughing, boom, you're at the top of your brain.
Very important.
If you have to think abstractly to get comedy.
you gotta make fun of yourself, be self-deprecating, like make it, as soon as you make it a joke, it just takes away some of the power of it.
It does.
And you laugh at it, you laugh how silly this world is and how this life works and all of this, and like this is all crazy. So it's like this is just a little patch of that.
Yeah. So we just talked about a lot of ways to help get yourself up from a lower brain state. The questions is my favorite, and then getting to laughter is great. If you can get to a point where you can ask yourself questions, you are moving in the right direction. Golden.
Yeah, you're pretty much out of the woods. Yeah.
Yes, pretty much out of the woods. Oh, before I pass the baton on to you real quick, I want to give one last tip. With a lot of my clients, what I encourage them to do is draw a ladder with these 5 brain states.
Oh, okay.
One brain state as each rung on the ladder. So the bottom rung is terror. The next one up is fear. The next one up is limbic. The next one up is concrete. The next one up is calm. Top one is calm. And I ask them to spend some time brainstorming, and I work with them for this as well, to draw 3 or 4 bullet points between each rung on the ladder of steps they can take to help regulate from one brain state to the next. Because what works for me may not work for you. Now, there are some overarching themes. When you're really low in the brain, physical stimulation, strong smells are a really great way to regulate. But what works best for me may not work best for you. So find a context. Think about it. Prepare yourself in advance. Plan ahead for when you do get low in the brain. What can you do? So you write out the steps from each rung to the next and keep it with you. Take a picture on your phone. Write it out on your phone. Keep it in a 3x5 card in your pocket, in your wallet. Put a sticky note in your car, on your bathroom mirror, inside your kitchen cabinet. Places where you're going to see it so that it takes the thinking away from the process when you can't think. All you have to do is read.
Yeah.
And a lot of us learned to read at a young enough age where a lot of stressful situations where we got really limbic happened after that. So you still retain the ability to read even when you're in a really low part of the brain.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't have to sit there and think, what were the questions I was supposed to ask myself? I don't remember what was the visualization Serina described on that one podcast I listened to a while ago. You have a tangible thing. Keep it with you if you know that you're going into a stressful situation. That's your version of a safety plan. You know, even if I start freaking out and having a panic attack, I've got an escape route.
Right.
Write a joke down for yourself, something that's amusing for you. I just read this one. What are the strongest days of the week?
I don't know.
Saturday and Sunday. The rest are just weekdays.
Boo. That's a joke that would make you laugh. That would make me more limbic.
But something. I mean, it's just an idea. But give yourself an out. When you can't think well, make something else think for you. If you don't have a partner in crime who's going to help you regulate, help yourself regulate. Give yourself that cheat sheet.
Yeah.
Ready to go. So that's my last tip. I think that's a really, really great way. If you're low in the brain, how do you climb back out?
Yes. So those were all really good stuff. Yeah. I like that ladder thing. I don't think I've heard you talk about that before.
I do. I love the ladder analogy. So now I've spent a lot of time talking about going from the bottom of the brain up, but I think, and that's great, some people need that, but I think what's most helpful even for a lot of people is how do you not fall down low in the brain in the first place? And Jeremy is really good at that game. So I'm going to pass that baton back over to you.
Thank you.
Now you can take over.
Yeah. So, we're talking a lot about regulating, and I wanted to mention this is one of the a favorite concept of mine that I pulled from a book by Susan Cain. The book's called Quiet, and it's about introverts living in an extroverted world. And she talks a lot about regulating in her own language, but she presented this concept of optimum level of stimulation. And this is, I'll just go through the example she used in the book and then how I kind of apply it to my own life. So you have, in this example, the person's introverted. So let's say, I'll just use me as an example. I'm at my house. I'm reading a book, sipping some coffee. I'm having a great time. I'm just it's very relaxed. I'm in a good space. I'm reading. And then, after about an hour, I start to kind of read the same couple sentences over and over again. I'm no longer in that sweet spot. I'm getting kind of bored. I don't really care about this anymore. Put the book down, pick up my phone, call a friend. Be like, hey, you want to go get some coffee at a coffee shop? And they're like, yeah, no, I'd love that. So I'm like, sweet. But my friend's extroverted. So I go over to the coffee shop. We sit down. Now we have a conversation, a little more caffeine. We're having a good exchange. Everything's
stimulation.
Yeah, great. Humans are very stimulating to other humans, especially good conversation. So now I'm in my sweet spot. My friend, who's extroverted, is getting a little bored with the conversation. It's one-on-one, and they're like, okay, after that played out for an hour, maybe 2 hours, they're like, okay, I gotta up this thing. So they're going
more stimulation.
They're like, hey, you want to go to this block party that's happening right now? And I'm like, all right. So I go, and then I go with him, and then he goes off into the party and having a good old time doing that. I go to the party and I'm immediately overstimulated. There's lots of things going on, kids screaming, there's food, there's a lot of people, and I'm just
loud music.
I have sensitive ears. I'd prefer it to be a little more quiet. I'd like to have more control over the volume of things. So I'm overstimulated. So I drop back and I don't find my equilibrium again until like, maybe I grab a beer and then I float to the outskirts and now I'm having a one-on-one conversation with one of his neighbors, somebody else at the party. And now I'm back in my sweet spot of, okay, one-on-one conversation. I'm on the outskirts of all this sound and noise and chaos. And I'm in my optimum level of stimulation again. So that's the example. So just knowing that people are constantly trying to hit this equilibrium in their brain and that it's a moving target.
Because sometimes you need more stimulation, sometimes you need less.
Yeah, and then the same thing doesn't always work. There's a lot of factors. Again, that's a very broad concept, but I like knowing that that's what everyone is trying to do. Everyone's trying to find their optimum level of stimulation, and it's a different amount for every person at different times, at different parts of the day, at all these things are going on. And then you combine that with brain state regulation and all the things that come with that. It's a very interesting mix of things that are going on. So
can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think, I haven't thought about it in this context before. Do you think when you're becoming bored, you're dropping lower in the brain? Do you think that becomes a point of fear in some cases? Not like terror, like I'm going to die, but like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I don't know how I'm going to, I feel bad. You start becoming more emotional.
I have a loose theory about that. Again, not a scientist. These are just my anecdotal observations. I do not like being bored. And
you have a visceral response.
I have a visceral response for being understimulated.
Somatic. You've got to be lower in the brain.
For sure. And I think it has something to do with knowing that the more like bored to me is, a lot of times people say the opposite of happiness is sadness, but to me the opposite of happiness is boredom.
It's just nothing.
Because boredom is a sense of disengagement. You're no longer engaging in something. And that to me is like on the spectrum of, they talk about on the spectrum of stimulation, you've got the rust out zone, which is when you're not pushing your body hard and you're so disconnected. That's the extreme end of the rust out zone is depression.
Okay.
And depression, and you're going to go off by yourself and just kind of curl up into a ball of mush.
Low level of activity, low level of brain
and
capacity
again,
of like desire to do things.
We mentioned this before. Depression even has a biological response. It's again, when people get stuck in that, it used to be like you sustain an injury in the tribe, you would go off by yourself. For guys, it drops testosterone. You have to recover from that injury. So with the hormonal response, it prevents you from doing stupid things that would injure you further, keeps you in one place, makes you okay with staying in an area, and then you work your way back out. The problem is when you get stuck in that, much like we talked about with the brain states. The other end of the spectrum of that rust out zone is the burnout zone. Yeah. And that's another thing that people like doing, which is like caffeine, getting things done, hammering down, phone calls all the time, like nonstop activity and stimulation. And it's getting to that more of the overstimulated area. So I feel like in general, introverts have a tendency to go more towards the rust out zone. Extroverts have more of a tendency to go towards burnout.
Yeah, I would agree with you with that because generally speaking, introverts need less stimulation to find their optimum equilibrium from a interacting with people sort of standpoint.
It's a different type of stimulation.
It's a different type of stimulation. And then the extroverts tend to need more people. So that's why they have the proclivity towards phone calls and meetings and just doing and caffeine and all these things.
Well, and it's a lot when you talk about regulating, and what I'm circling and getting around to is how do you keep your brain in the sweet spot? That's what I try and do most of the time.
When you're in the sweet spot, you're in the top of your brain,
tremendously regulated.
Tremendously regulated. That's a great way to say that.
So, and for me, that's my challenge because it's very hard because I have a more intense brain. I need a lot of new stuff coming in. There's a sense of novelty. It's like which has a biological response. You want to be searching for new things and finding and figuring out new things, new hunting patches, new berry patches, new places for resources, all kinds of stuff. So, but for me, like introverts tend to lean towards being nerds because we can rabbit hole down things we find interesting. And it's how you can kind of tell where you lie on the spectrum. Most people aren't all the way introverted or all the way extroverted. Again, that's a spectrum. They're usually somewhere kind of in betwixt, in the middle. But you can tell like a super extrovert would be the type of person that really enjoys going to a club.
Yeah.
Loud music, alcohol, like just
tons of people to
feeding
with.
Off the vibes of that, like that kind of a thing, where an introvert would perhaps like a quiet drink with a friend. Like that's more recharging, more rejuvenating to them than that kind of a club scene. So, and there's nothing wrong with either. It's just a different.
Well, it's what you said. It's about finding your optimum level of stimulation, understanding yourself well enough in the context of where you are to keep yourself well regulated.
Yeah, yeah. And if we are trying to link in some of the stuff that I want to talk about to make sure everyone's staying in their happy place. And I use that as a broad term because I don't think really the goal of any of this is to be happy. That's an emotion. It's you want to be an excellent pilot of your brain and body. So you want to be able to maneuver this, meat-filled skin bag around to do the things that you want to get done and be the most effective, impactful, kind human you can be in the process. So, when you're in your prefrontal cortex, that's in general where you're going to make your best decisions.
Right.
So one of the things that I highly encourage, and I've managed to start doing this way more now, is using that space to develop tools and skills that I can use in a lower brain state to get me back out.
Yep.
So when you talked about like you're not going to encode anything when you're in a terror space or a fear space or even limbic and really emotional, it's very hard to encode new information, new skills. So one of the things I do, like I did meditation for a little while, probably about a year. I was doing it really consistently with Headspace.
The app.
I had, it's an app. And a lot of the stuff I was doing was like 10-minute meditations. And the thing that I took away from that is that, well, one, I don't particularly enjoy meditation. And I figured out that I meditate much differently than
different type of meditation
than that type. And I'll kind of explain where I find my sweet spots. But the biggest thing that I took away from that, I got so many reps of doing this one particular type of meditation with Headspace. And one of it is just counting your breaths, and I would go like, I count to 10, but I count the inhale and the exhale. That's 1, 2.
Okay.
So then it's really technically like 5 breaths. But because I did that so much, I found that when I was feeling like a little emotional or panicky or whatever, or having like an anxious response to something, I had access to like, okay, just slow this down. Like,
and count your breath.
1, 2.
Perfect.
But it's because I did that meditation so much when I was in a super chill spot. That's the reason. I didn't like think of that all myself in the moment.
Because you drilled it, you put it into your body in such a way, you develop that skill so that it can, when you're low in the brain, you can be reactive and reflexive. So you were able to reflexively go back to that moment. Yeah. Because you had developed that skill in a context where you could then access it later.
Yep.
Perfect.
So, so these are I will share a couple of my strategies. We're about an hour in right now, so I don't want to stay too. I will give you like kind of my top things. So, I used this example before, but I don't know if anybody remembers those big yellow funnels that were at like shopping malls where you
for
put
like the donations,
you put a penny in and it spins around the top, and then as it spins it picks up speed and it goes further and further down. Now if you imagine you had to get that penny out of there, it's much easier to get it when it's going slow around the large part than when it's starting to spiral really quickly down the middle of the funnel. Same's true of your brain state.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant.
It's much easier to grab that penny, that thought, that spiral higher up in the spiral. So because I do not enjoy having anxiety and freaking out, because generally less optimal decisions are made in that state, I have developed a system, at least for myself, of how to keep myself more cognitive and in a healthier space for what I'm trying to do in my life. So one of the first things that I do is if I feel myself getting pissed or more emotional or
anxious.
just anxious, any of that stuff, is like I take a breath and I say, I'm sitting the next few plays out, and I revoke my decision-making capacity.
That's a good one.
And I'm like, you can't make any decisions right now that are going to impact your future. Like you're sitting the next few plays out. So what that means is like no big purchases, no, because I've had some experience being depressed, and you can make some dumb choices because you think they're going to help you out, and they're not. It's like flailing in the dark. You're just not going to hit anything close to what you want to be aiming at. So I revoke my own. I was using this term the other day. Like people say, because I own my own contracting business and do all these things, be like, oh, it must be like great to be your own boss. I'm like, but okay, when you say that, do you like, what is a boss? A boss is someone that sets out a framework and tells you what you have to do. I have to do that for myself.
That's harder.
And like being a boss of me, like I have to be a little bit of a dick and set up like, no, you need to do this, and push myself, because I don't have a boss doing that for me.
Yeah.
Which sometimes is easier.
It is sometimes easier. It's that you relinquish that intrinsic capacity and say, I just have to do what the person tells me to do.
And then, so yeah, I revoke my decision-making abilities. And then if I have done things correctly, I will pre-make decisions for myself when I'm in a good space.
I see.
So, great example is what we do with prepping our food. I'll do food prep, and I make my smoothie bags that have the vegetables in one, and I've got the fruit and ice in another, and they're in the fridge or freezer. And then I have all my stuff, because in the morning, I'm not in the most cognitive space. I need to make that shit as easy as possible. That's why the coffee is ready to go. All I do is turn on the kettle. The water's already loaded in there. I've already ground the beans the night before. They're sitting in the French press. So it's smooth. I have pre-made those decisions for myself, because now I'm regulating my blood sugar with good nutrition. A lot of times I pack my lunch, my lunch usually is my smoothie, so it's pretty much all good to go the night before. Now I make the smoothie the morning of, but I make that as easy on myself as possible. And then I also pre-make, recently it's been a lot of these potato skins. So when I get home from work, a lot of times I'm ravenous and I just want to like crush some food. And if there's anything non-optimal in the house, I will shove that in my
candy, cookies, ice cream
in my face, which is why, one, we don't have a lot of that stuff in here. And then two, I pre-make, so I make my food environment a target-rich environment.
So you basically do what we mentioned this a minute ago, but I think you can elaborate on this for us. You are basically predicting ahead of time for yourself. I like the word predicting. So that when you get into that state where you're likely to drop lower in the brain and become more impulsive or eat more emotionally or what have you, whatever's here, I just want it because it tastes good and I'm super hungry. You are preparing ahead of time for that stressful moment, stressful, so to speak, so that you make a good decision. You're taking away some of the guesswork for yourself. And that's what a lot of regulation is preparing ahead of time. If you have the ability to predict, to say, when I get home, I know I'm going to be ravenous. So on the week before, days in advance, I'm going to prepare food to have available so that I will eat it in that moment. Like, that's awesome. That's fantastic. That's the goal.
It's literally pre-making good decisions for yourself. And the key,
especially in contexts are more difficult.
And the key that I've seen is trusting the pre-made decision. Super clutch.
That's a good one.
And you can't, particularly if you've pre-made the decision for yourself, not being like, what does that dickhead know? Like that's kind of like when you're lower, you're like, I gotta know anything. Like I'm gonna do what I want. So, and then there are, finding that optimum level of stimulation, going back to, there's been a lot of kickback on people being obsessed with their phones and listening to things all the time. And I think it's very easy for folks that didn't grow up with the internet or phones or video games to kind of
this type of media
to be a little bit aggressive about some of the technologies because they may not understand them or they haven't experienced them or whatever. That might be a whole different podcast.
Or they've known them in a different context.
So, it's a concept I've been fleshing out for a while now, is what is your media diet? And much like food, provides nutrients for your body, I think media provides nutrients for your brain, and there are healthier versions of it, at least more optimal, I would say.
I think that's great.
So, and then for me, media has been a tremendous way to regulate. I do a lot of that. I think more people should be soundtracking their lives. So I grew up where music was expensive. I was a member of like Columbia House and stuff. And I got, thankfully my dad had some old records that were actually good, and listened to Led Zeppelin and the Beatles.
Awesome.
So I grew, and then I got a computer. I could burn CDs. And then that was when like downloading music illegally, I was like, holy crap, I can get all this music. And now I have something like Spotify where I pay $10 a month, and I have access to every song ever pretty much. But music encodes somatically.
Yeah, it's a great way to regulate your brain.
It really, really can help regulate. So I have some favorite playlists that I will listen to myself, or listen, where it transports me back to a vacation or to a holiday or to just a good time in my life. Like my running mix has some of the same songs on it that I've been listening to forever, for like over 2 decades now. So it's like the music is so powerful. You can
That's a great one.
Do yourself a solid, make yourself a playlist of your favorite jams that puts you in a good spot. And then listen to it when you're in a good space too.
Yeah.
When I'm thinking about it, when I go on vacation, I try to listen to as much new music as I can, because I want my brain to remember the first time I heard this was in Hilton Head.
Yeah, and it was a very positive association.
Very positive, and that way when I go back, I can then be like, okay, when I'm having a bad time, I listen to that song. It reminds me of the beach in Hilton Head when I was chilling, and it can put you right back in that space of, it's like triggering yourself in a positive way.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I didn't even touch on music. Music is a great way to regulate your brain. It's phenomenal. Yep. Especially, different beats, different tempos can really help you to feel better or worse in your brain.
And so, and the way I use it, a lot of the songs that I like a lot are from some of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
And, that's another way I use movies. Like I look at my movie collection as a collection of friends. Like I have such deep connection to some of those films that are, from my childhood, like Aladdin. Man, I love Aladdin. Like I'll watch that. You put that on, I'll watch that all day. Like it's such a good, like if I'm ever in a bad spot, you just kind of know these are the things that are going to prevent me from going lower. And sometimes that's really what regulation's about. It's not so much about trying to get you to the
climb back up
optimum level. Like life can throw some shit at you and it hurts. And sometimes the best thing you can do is keep your brain from going lower. Just pump the brakes, slow it down, and then just catch yourself. And it's okay to not just get back into a Spock-like state of mind where everything's completely rational and you're in this very...
Well, I think he's black and white.
Spock?
Yeah, I don't think he's creative and
he's not emotional,
fluid.
But he can project in the future. It's very hyper rational.
That's true. You're right.
So,
but no, I agree with you. I think it's nice to experience those different states when they're needed, when they're in the right context.
Yeah. And then for meditation thing, what I found is like running is really more of my meditation than anything. And
more of a physical meditation.
My favorite jam is to run with a good soundtrack on, like I really scored nicely. So I make my own custom playlists, which I may share with some of you guys later.
Yeah.
But that puts me in a very good place because you're getting into running a little bit. And I think I talk about a lot of the things I do is finding a safe place to put your brain.
Yeah, that's a great one.
And the more in shape you get, the more you can push yourself. Running is for me is about pushing my body. I'm giving a stressor that I'm in control of to my body that it has to focus on. And I think Rogan was talking about this week I think, and I completely agree with what he has to say, is that your brain requires your brain and body require physical stress. Like I think every day. And I think some people are wired differently. I know I've got to hammer down pretty hard.
Yeah, humans were not created to be sedentary.
Yeah. So you got to move, you got to push. And for me, I like pushing probably harder than the average bear, but that's totally fine. But I'm finding a way to do it in a sustainable way. And for me, that instinct to run is a lot of times my reaction to when I'm not feeling well and I'm starting to drop lower in my brain is that I'm like, okay, just let's go on a run. Let's do a lap around Lake Alina. And it's not that every time I run I'm pissed off or something, but it's a really positive association I have in my brain. I put on a good playlist and then I just take off, and you have this external stressor that the brain can focus on, and then you're soundtracking it with good tunes that are going to keep you moving. And then you've got the outside, air, whether it's hot or cold or whatever, and there's a sense of movement. There's something about humans and movement that's very dissipating of stress.
Well, there's somatic. You've got that air is a different temperature. You've got sound. You've got all these things, that physical movement. You're right. We talked about how you have this stress stuff that comes out. You need 22 minutes of a breather, basically, to regulate. Movement is one of the best ways to help that dissipate.
Yeah.
One of the best ways. Running, perfect.
So running, and that can be used both ways, as we talked about being there's proactive, preventative, and then actually getting yourself out of a bad space. So running, if you've developed that habit of exercise, and it doesn't have to be running, it can be
anything. It
can be anything you have access to that you can do sustainably. Even walking a dog is great.
Or just walking.
So if you don't have to discriminate against people that don't have dogs, just walking.
Walk a cat. No,
that's another thing that I do. But so running, I go to the gym, usually if I'm stressed out, I like something that I can do at my own pace.
Yeah.
I like dictating
Push
it a little bit.
Harder if you need to.
Yeah. So go into strength conditioning, doing that kind of a workout, then jump in the sauna. That's another external stressor that you have to your brain has to deal with the heat. And then, my regulation, even if I'm not in a good mood, I go do jiu-jitsu. And then when we get to the rolling portion of it, there's someone there trying to strangle me. There's nothing more, I'm very focused because you have to be. And it gives you, again, something else to focus on. Humans are designed to focus on problems, solve them, move on. That's kind of what and the more you can give your brain very defined things to focus on, in the meditation sense, it's your breath. And then in running, it's your cadence, the rhythm, the speed, the distance. And it's completely objective because there's the speed is the speed, the distance is the distance, your cadence is your cadence. There's no you can't bullshit it. And I really like things that I can't bullshit because I'm a bullshitter.
Yeah.
and going back a little bit, all these things that I'm talking about, physical exercise, pushing yourself, it makes regulating your brain easier.
Yes, agreed.
Because you're automatically I went on a hellacious hell run yesterday. Where it was just very, very hot, and threw myself up the mountain and ran out of water because I was an idiot. But I made it through, and then I'm super chill the rest of the day. I'm not. It keeps me, because I think particularly guys need a really aggressive they need a healthy outlet for aggression, and I think martial arts can do that, running can do that, all that kind of stuff. A lot of things
can do that, yeah.
And it's particularly hard physical exercise. That's what I prefer. I would recommend it, or work yourself up to it in a healthy way. Go back and listen to that Tim and Angie podcast that we did. Because I do jujitsu and run and do these things, strength conditioning and sauna and all these things, when I am in a stressful situation, it's way easier for me to regulate if I've been keeping up with this kind of I don't know, what would you call it, protocol or whatever, this framework I've set up. Because if I'm feeling pretty rational, then I get rattled and I start to get a little more limbic. It really slows the process down of
gives you some space.
Yeah, it gives you space, and also you put it into a framework of well, no one's trying to choke me out right now, so it's not really that stressful, because I already did something really hard. Even in Bikram yoga, they say this is the hardest thing you'll do all day.
Yeah, they try to put the same context,
where you're stressing the body more than you would in a normal situation. And I think that's a big deal for people, is to push themselves. If you can voluntarily push yourself hard, when life pushes you hard, you're I've already been here.
Right. I know what to do in this situation.
I've already been in this deep water.
Yeah. I love what you're talking. Building this protocol for yourself is all about prevention, and I think you're totally right. It's easier to grab that penny at the top of the yellow funnel than when it gets lower.
Yeah.
It's even harder to roll that penny back up.
Yeah.
Right? Right? It's like no one's ever done that. Yeah. You need some magnets, maybe we can probably figure out how to do that. But keeping yourself from going down is a really awesome thing to do. That's the best choice, I think, for people listening, is develop a plan, figure out your optimum level of stimulation, figure out a preventative protocol for yourself. You know you've got to push it pretty hard to get to a point where you're not going to have anxiety and stress and all these things come sneak up on you. So I think that's great. And I think it's also great because you said this, but you almost said this. When you develop these skills here in the thinking part of your brain, you can kind of access them better when you're in the less thinking part of your brain.
Yeah.
So like for you, when you're rolling jujitsu, you want to be focused. You want to be lower in your brain to a degree. Like we said, you can move through brain states rapidly. In a matter of a nanosecond, you can go up, down, up, down, up, down, right? So you get down to the point where someone's choking you out, but then you can pop right back up to your creative center, access that information, and utilize that, right, to get out of the chokehold or to put him in a chokehold.
Yeah, and I'd say that's a common misconception with martial arts and fighting and things, is that they think everyone that's good or whatever is these like rage monsters, and almost everyone is the calmest person they're the calmest people. It's the safest place to be because everyone's super chill because everyone's trying to strangle each other, punch them in the face or whatever.
Yeah.
And you've got to be calm. And then that's what really, to be good and effective, you have to be in a kind of calm focus space, which is a really healthy place to have your brain. And that, because going hard in a good match, someone you're kind of maybe a little bit better than you or a lot better than you, it makes everything else you do in your world easier. And it's a problem solving game, and it's super, super fun. But that's, just staying on jiu-jitsu for a second, you want to, in any sporting activity you're trying to do, if you know when you're going into competition or just roll it, you want to be better in general. When you're in that prefrontal cognitive space, you want to be like, okay, I need a training plan. I need to like drill this sequence, because when I get in this spot, I tend to freak out a little bit. And I need a better way out.
Yeah,
and that's
giving
why
yourself a way out.
And that's why jiu-jitsu, I think, is it extrapolates nicely to the rest of the world, because sometimes you're getting smashed and sometimes you're the one doing the smashing. And it's like, it prepares you because your brain gets in these spots of like, oh shit, I'm going to get choked out right now. I need to escape. And that's that lower, like, oh shit, like panic. But you get out of it so many times that you kind of become used to it. You become used to bringing your brain back out.
Yep. You get used to bringing your brain back out. Exactly.
So it's more of using your prefrontal cortex, rational brain, to develop interdimensional skills that you can access when you're in a different realm, basically, because you're almost a different person. You are. When you're in, and also hopefully between this conversation and the last one we had, is that, give a little bit of grace to people that might not be in an optimum brain space for their current context. And
this regulation stuff is hard. I love your plan that you've laid out and just described, because you're basically saying, I know I have to keep the reps going. I have to get to my workouts each week. I have to get to jiu-jitsu. I have to do my runs. I have to do the things that I know I need to do. Listen to my music to keep my brain stable. And that's okay. So that when it becomes unstable, I can get out of it quicker. Yeah. That's what it's all about. That's what this whole regulation process is all about, finding a plan of action that works for you, that keeps you from going down low in the brain. Like, it's so much easier to stop yourself from going down than to climb back up that ladder.
Yeah. Yeah.
But sometimes you fall down and you got to climb back up the ladder. So understanding those skills, the more layers you can give yourself up at the top of your brain, the easier it is going to be to climb back up when you've fallen down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have 3 very, doable recommendations for everybody from a media diet perspective to help you regulate. 1, if you can, make yourself a playlist of your favorite jams. I have a list called Germ Jams that I've been listening to forever. They're all like the same songs that I've been listening to they usually mean something to me or have some affiliation with a place that I like or a movie I like. Also 2, have some favorite movies, like own them. Yeah. Either in Blu-ray or on your Apple, something on your Apple TV, whatever it is. That, and I think that's what part of like collections are. Like if you have your favorite for me, it's media. I like having my movies on tap. I want to be able to watch them.
Yeah.
And you can, if you say like, okay, I don't feel well, I'm not going to make any more of these decisions, so I'm going to watch this movie that's my favorite movie. Mm-hmm. Your brain remembers it's your favorite movie. Right. You're going to like that movie even if you don't feel well. Mm-hmm. So you can watch that and kind of get your way out, and you'll feel better when it's over. You can even watch it again if that's cool.
Yeah.
And then my last one is a more recent one, is find some podcasts that you like. I like different podcasts for different reasons at different parts of my brain state.
Right.
That reflex that I have to sit the next few plays out.
Yeah, that's great.
And not make any more decisions. I do the same thing where sometimes you need to stop having thoughts. Like, stop trying to think through something. Give yourself a break. You're not going to figure it out in the state that you are in.
Right.
So I will then outsource my thinking. And I listen to Joe Rogan, talk to one of his friends or a scientist or whoever, and it's tremendous. It's like I get to sit in on a conversation between two calm people, and I like people that are calm and kind. I don't want to hear anybody screaming at each other, arguing. That does nothing for me except agitate me.
Make it worse.
So find, and there's something about listening to human conversation between people that really care about each other that really is a calming thing. You can be like, oh, I'm just going to listen to their thought process for a while and just treat it like mine. And it's a really nice way to, again, it engages your brain in a different way.
It puts you into an observer role, very clearly into an observer role.
Right. And most of these things, anytime I'm listening to a podcast or whatever, I'm usually using my AirPods and I'm doing something else.
Right. Physical movement.
I'm painting. And it keeps me from going into a worse place when I'm bored. And that's really what I try to avoid most of the time, is not being bored. I want to be very engaged with things, and at least in my observation, there's, I would rather be a little bit overstimulated than under. So
well, and it's because for your specific context, when you become bored, that's when you're susceptible to let that penny go down the hole.
Correct.
So know for yourself, for you, if I start getting bored, that's kind of the tipping point. Or if I get too bored, that's the tipping point where I'm more likely to spiral down to that trap.
Yeah.
So if I prevent myself from being bored, I'm going to be good.
Yep.
And that's great. I think those are some very great tips.
So it's just, and you said preventative, and I want to just throw another word in there. It's proactive.
Proactive. Yeah, that's great.
Preventative is great, but you want to get
proactive is better.
Past it into proactive of like, I want to be in an optimum brain state most of the time, like as much of the time as I can. I want to be in the most, I guess is a better way to put it, the most appropriate brain state for the context in which I am living. Did I say that right?
Yeah, I think that's great.
Makes sense?
That makes a lot of sense. That's perfect.
And then all the things that I do that keep me in that space will help me to be the best version of me, the most kind version of me, the most patient version of me, and I'm making the best decisions for my future and not screwing over future Jeremy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and to tag back to the podcast we did with your dad, when you're in the most regulated state, you can build healthy relationships. You can be on the other end of that. Like, other people can build healthier relationships with you because you're a healthier person.
Yeah.
So it impacts all of the areas of your life when you can regulate and within context of what you're doing. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. And it gives you another framework to look at people and what everybody's doing. Like, oh, everyone's trying to find this optimum level of stimulation and find their equilibrium. And sometimes this person's equilibrium is set in their limbic system. So they really like being in this.
Or at least that's the thing they're most familiar with.
Right.
And it's scary to be in a state that you're not familiar with.
Yeah. And it's very hard to change that default setting. But I think understanding some of these frameworks will allow people, and at least for me, it's given me much more grace for people.
I was going to touch on that too.
Because if someone's having a bad day, you're like, well, I don't know what happened to them.
Yeah, you don't know what context they're living in.
They're in a less optimal brain space than they would probably like to be for a variety of reasons. And
this is where I think it's nice that you can sort of subtly help someone regulate. You're dealing with someone, a friend, a family member who's really dysregulated. You're like, oh, you're not. You're regulating yourself. You're recognizing. You're saying, wow, they're not in a good spot. You can sort of help them out of it very kindly and just talk about things like, oh, what did you have for breakfast yesterday? I mean, what's your favorite meal? What if you had to pick a birthday meal that I will make for you from scratch? for your birthday, what would it be? Hey, now they're creative. At least you've helped them regulate a little bit more in that moment. They're way up higher in the brain, and you can help. Just exactly what you do with your paint clients. You help to diffuse the situation. They feel more calm. They're more regulated. You make some jokes, get them to laugh. But then you don't have to take that offensively. A lot of us will, if someone's dysregulated, we monkey them. What did you say? Ape them?
Ape them, yeah.
You reflect that back, and you don't want that. You want to recognize, no, I'm in the driver's seat here. I've got my own personal power. And you know what I can do? The cool thing about that is I can show my friend who's having a bad day how to have their own personal power. Not that you're going to jump in the driver's seat for them, but you can help them to regulate you. So it's all the way around a wonderful, fantastic place to be.
Yeah, and I think probably a worthy conversation for us to talk about later is to, as we kind of layer these frameworks we're talking about with brain state regulation, like how do you then create an environment for yourself, whether it's at work or in your home, that is conducive to you having good brain regulation?
Yeah.
Like creating an oasis in your house, not a conflict zone, not chaos, not that.
That's a good idea.
And what does that look like? How does this carry over into a kind of a practical situation? So, and that's something that I've given quite a bit of thought to, and we've executed pretty well in our own house, and my parents did a great job and all that stuff too. So
yeah, and I mean, I do, to touch on this, we'll close with this if you want. I think about that. I'm aware of these things. I think about that in my office.
Yes.
I play nice, soft spa music. I have a diffuser with some really nice calming scents. I've got a white noise machine. A nice, soft pitch that is very soothing to the brain. I have Gus. Now, he's my service dog, but in my office, sometimes he plays the role of therapy dog, where if my clients are stressed, petting a dog is a great way to regulate yourself from a lower brain state up higher.
Yeah.
Right? Petting your cat, taking, any of those things. So, and even just watching him wag his tail can be regulating to the brain. Yeah. So I do, and you have comfy chairs, and I speak very soft. I mean, normally I'm soft-spoken like this anyhow, but I'm a little bit more aware of that if I know someone's more amped up. So you're trying to create an environment where people can be regulated, and that's a beautiful thing. It's we can definitely talk about that in another episode too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because we're kind of like our own little environments as we walk around, and then as you build an office or you have a home or anything like that, then there's more of those factors you can control and influence, and then that really, even just with paint colors, if you want to.
Even just with paint colors.
It really affects how people feel in a room and so on and so forth.
Yep.
So,
thanks, Jeremy. This was pretty good.
I think that was good. That was a good one. I like that. All right. All right, guys. We'll see you in the outro.
Thanks for listening, everybody. That is it for us today, the end of our 2-part series on brain state regulation. I really hope that you enjoyed. I hope there were some things in there that were useful for you that you can practice for yourself. For full show notes, you can go to our website, thepainterandthepixie.com. And for show updates and fun things throughout the week, you can follow us on Instagram, which is @thepainterandthepixie. This was one of our favorite episodes that we've done. That I really enjoyed this series because it gives people a lot of context, a lot of tools to work through a lot of these things on their own. It's pretty cool.
And I think we're going to continue to try and bring some of these. I don't think the concepts are particularly complicated. They're just less known and not as
common. People don't know
less
about
common.
them,
So some people just may not even be aware of this stuff, and we really want to bring a lot of this kind of stuff to a practical place for folks, and kind of the things of what Serina and I use in our own lives, how we regulate, how we're proactive about having quality and good brain state regulation. So I could talk about that for a lot longer, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so. I think now that we've got these episodes in the bag, we can sort of refer back to them. We can now that if people have listened, we can say, okay, we can talk about brain states. We have a lot of really fun episodes planned for you guys coming up here in the future. So
we got some more,
stay tuned.
Some more guests that are incredibly qualified to talk about what they're going to be talking about, and some. I don't know if you call it some deeper material. It's got a little bit more meat to it.
We're leaving the shallow waters on some of this stuff.
Yeah. We'll be moving into the deeper end of the pool for sure.
That's great.
So
awesome.
Sweet.
Yeah. Thanks again for listening, everybody.
Yeah. Y'all have a good one. Be kind to one another, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Peace.
Amazing.